I came to with the harsh glare of hospital lights pulsing against my eyelids and the cold bite of polished tile pressed against my cheek. For a moment, I did not know where I was or whether I was dreaming, but then the sound hit me. Urgent voices, rapid footsteps, the rising panic of medical alarms that were not supposed to be going off like this. My ears rang a sharp electric buzz that drowned everything except one desperate cry from somewhere above me. Code Blue Room 207. Over and over. That number jolted through me like ice water. 207 was my father's room. My father was dying. I tried to push myself up, but my arm shook beneath me and buckled, slamming my shoulder back onto the floor. The world swam. My breath came shallow and ragged, and I tasted metal in my mouth. A warm line of liquid slid down the side of my temple and pooled beneath my jaw. The hallway around me blurred and doubled. I reached forward with my fingertips, dragging myself across the tile, inch by inch, too weak to stand, but too terrified to stop. I could see frantic movement inside the room ahead, blue scrubs, a crash cart, a flash of paddles, a nurse with trembling hands shouting for epinephrine. My heart hammered against my ribs. I forced my body forward again. "Dad!" I whispered it first, and then I said it louder. "Dad, I am here." But my voice sounded thin and broken like it was coming from someone else. Then a shadow loomed beside me and I froze. A low voice brushed my ear like poison. "Emily, you should not have gotten in the way." Blake Hale crouched beside me, his polished shoes inches from my fingertips. My vision sharpened just enough to see the cold satisfaction in his eyes. He leaned in closer, voice steady and chilling, almost gentle, like he was announcing the weather. "He is going to go. When he does, everything becomes ours." I tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp came out of my throat. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to claw my way into that room and throw myself over my father's chest and shield him from the world. But my limbs felt heavy and my head spun. Blake rose slowly, smoothing the front of his shirt, as if he had merely finished giving a business presentation rather than whispering a death sentence over his unconscious stepfather. Footsteps thundered from the far end of the corridor. 2 security officers hurried toward us. Blake lifted his hands in a practiced gesture of innocence. "She attacked us. She is unstable." His voice was calm, rehearsed, dripping with false concern. One guard grabbed his arm anyway. The other knelt beside me, trying to keep me still, but I fought his hands. I could not stay on this floor. I could not lie here while my father's heartbeat faltered in the next room. Pushing through the dizziness, I planted my palm and forced my body another inch forward. The tile skidded beneath my skin. I heard a doctor shout from inside the room, "Stay with us, sir. Resume compressions. Do not stop." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I pulled again. The pain in my skull flared and my stomach twisted, but I kept crawling. My father once marched through storms aboard a naval ship. He once stood at my little league fence in uniform, still smelling like salt and diesel, because he promised he would never miss a game. I was not going to miss this moment. I was not going to let him face this alone. A nurse tried to hold my shoulders. "Emily, please do not move. You are hurt." But every second I wasted here on this floor felt like a betrayal. I gritted my teeth and whispered through clenched breath, "I am here, Dad. Stay with me." The room flickered again and my vision wavered, but I kept pushing. The electronic beeps stuttered inside the room. Someone yelled, "Clear." A flash burst through the doorway. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything except the desperate rhythm of life and death fighting inches away. One more pull, then another. I would scrape my skin raw before I let go. My muscles trembled, my lungs burned, yet the only fear I felt was losing him. If I pass out here, he dies. If I stay silent, they win. Blake's voice still echoed in my mind like a threat carved into bone. Everything becomes ours. No, not while I can move. Not while I can breathe. Not while there is 1 ounce of strength left in me. I raised my head just enough to lock my eyes on the doorway and whispered again, Dad, do not leave me. And if someone tried to kill your parent for money, ask yourself this. Would you stay down or would you crawl through pain and blood to fight for the person who raised you? What would you do? When I think back to the beginning before hospitals and alarms and whispered threats in sterile corridors, I remember sunlight. I remember sitting in the back of my dad's old navy blue Ford truck, my bare feet propped on the dashboard because he always said life was too short to worry about scuff marks. I remember his voice singing off-key to country radio windows rolled down summer air whipping through my hair. Back then, I was 12, still small enough to fit curled against his side during movie nights, but old enough to feel the hollow ache when my mother's laugh vanished from the walls of our house. She died suddenly, a stroke the doctors never saw coming, and one morning I woke to silence that felt like a grave. My dad, James Carter, was a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer, the kind of man who could stare down a storm at sea without blinking. But grief cracked him open in ways I had never seen. For months, he moved through the house like a ghost folding laundry that still smelled like her perfume standing in doorways, as if waiting for her to walk back through them. But even in his sorrow, he never let me feel alone. Every night he sat at the edge of my bed, smoothing my hair and reminding me that duty and love sometimes mean enduring pain instead of running from it. I would not have survived those years without him. We healed slowly in small pieces like sea glass worn smooth by tides. He taught me to ride a bike again because I quit after Mom died. He joined the parent volunteer line at school events even when uniformed veterans rarely blended in with suburban PTA moms. When I cried before big exams, he made me chocolate pancakes shaped like anchors because he said I had to stay steady in every storm. He called me Squirt even when I pretended to be embarrassed. He gave me the only thing that mattered: security and unconditional love. For almost 3 years, it was just the two of us against the world. Then, everything shifted. I met her for the first time on a windy Wednesday afternoon. My father had warned me someone new might come into our lives. He had met her through a charity gala, he said. She was elegant, generous, intelligent. Her name was Victoria Hale. The moment she stepped through our door, she looked like she belonged in a magazine spread about women who never had to raise their voice because entire rooms bent toward their opinions. Tall, perfectly pressed ivory blazer diamond earrings that caught the light hair swept into a sleek twist. She smiled at me gently, but her eyes took inventory like she was scanning me for flaws. "Hello, Emily," she said in a voice soft enough to be mistaken for warmth. "I have heard so much about you." I mumbled a greeting and stayed close to Dad. Something in my stomach tightened. When she reached to brush a crumb off my shoulder like I was untidy, I flinched. Dad did not notice. He was radiant, hopeful, almost young again. And after years of watching grief age him overnight, I understood why he clung to that feeling. Everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, and I wanted that for him. Or, at least I thought I did. The first cracks came quietly. At dinners, she subtly corrected my table manners. When Dad was not looking, she critiqued my clothes in airy tones meant to seem helpful. "You would look so much more polished in navy or bone shades, dear. That color cheapens your complexion." She always said dear like it was a leash. Dad married her one autumn afternoon beneath oak trees dusted gold. I stood beside him in a pale dress I hated while her friends toasted their power couple union. Then Blake Hale arrived like a storm front. Tall, athletic, the kind of young man whose smile looked charming from a distance but too sharp up close. He shook my father's hand firmly and barely acknowledged me at all. Within weeks, he had moved into our home while finishing business classes after a disciplinary suspension he refused to discuss. His arrogance filled the hallway like smoke. He walked around shirtless, leaving messes that somehow became my responsibility. When I mentioned chores, he sneered and said I was lucky to live under his mother's roof, as if my father and 2 decades of service counted for nothing. One night, he slammed his fist into my bedroom door because I asked him to keep the music down. He grabbed my upper arm hard enough to bruise and hissed, "You are not the blood heir here. Know your place." When I told my father, Victoria swore Blake was simply struggling with change. She placed a manicured hand over Dad's and murmured, "He just needs time. Boys cope differently." Dad believed her. He believed in empathy and second chances the way sailors believe dawn always follows night. Over time, Victoria reorganized our accounts, merging finances in sleek digital folders I no longer had access to. She spoke for us at banks and dinners and doctor appointments. The house changed, too. Photos of my mother slowly disappeared from walls replaced by framed charity awards and architectural renderings of buildings I did not recognize. Our cozy life compressed into something polished and cold. I learned to keep my head down, finish school, and plan for college on scholarships rather than family support. Dad did not see the way she tightened control around us inch by inch, wrapping his trust like silk until he could not see the trap beneath. But I did. And the day she pulled him away from me in the hospital hallway years later, I remembered every small warning that had gone unnoticed, every forced smile, every bruise I hid, every moment she made him believe I was the unstable one. I promised myself then and there that history would not repeat. I would not lose him too. The day my father collapsed burned itself into my memory with the cruel clarity of breaking glass. It was early spring, one of those mornings where the air feels cold enough to bite and warm sunlight filters through like a promise you cannot quite trust. I had just finished a parent-teacher conference when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something in my chest tightened, and I answered. A nurse spoke urgently, her voice clipped and controlled in that way medical professionals use when danger has already arrived. "Is this Emily Carter? Your father was brought into Cedar Ridge Medical Center. He is experiencing acute cardiac distress. You should come immediately." My car keys slipped from my fingers, clattering across the school hallway. I did not even bother to grab my bag. I ran. At the hospital, the air smelled like bleach and fear. I pushed through the sliding doors and spotted a cluster of nurses rushing a gurney down the corridor. My father lay on it, eyes half open, skin gray, and waxy chest rising in shallow stutters. His once strong hands trembled against the sheets. A mask covered his mouth and nose, tubes snaked from his arms, and the monitor beside him blinked numbers that made my stomach drop. I reached him just as they rolled him into the ICU. "Dad," it came out as a broken whisper, the kind that does not sound like a voice at all, but a plea carved out of breath. His eyes flicked toward me, cloudy, unfocused. He tried to speak, but no sound came. In that brief moment, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Pure terror. Then, the doors shut between us. Minutes became elastic stretching until they felt like hours. A nurse guided me to a waiting chair and told me to breathe. I think I forgot how. My phone buzzed, and before I could answer, Victoria swept in like a gust of expensive perfume and designer heels, immaculate despite the chaos. "Where is he?" she demanded, voice sharp, not with panic, but annoyance. I stood still, shaking. "ICU. He is in cardiac distress." She blinked once slowly, and then her face shifted into a mask of sympathy so perfectly arranged it almost fooled me. Almost. She placed a hand on my shoulder, cool and heavy. "We have to stay calm. Stress makes things worse." Blake strode in behind her, wearing gym clothes and a smirk he tried to hide. He whispered something to Victoria, shooting me a sideways glance like I was an inconvenience rather than a daughter terrified of losing her only remaining parent. When they let me see him, he was hooked up to machines from every angle. His chest rose mechanically under the ventilator rhythm. Dr. Rachel Morgan introduced herself briskly. Late 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that told you she had seen too much heartbreak to waste time. She explained what we were facing. Severe cardiac arrhythmia, oxygen saturation dangerously unstable, continuous monitoring essential. Any disruption in alarms or medication could be fatal. She turned to me. "He needs constant vigilance. Our equipment will alert us to any change immediately. Do not worry, we are on it." I nodded, clinging to the words like a rope over deep water. Then she looked at Victoria and Blake, studying them with the kind of careful intuition seasoned doctors develop. A flicker passed over her face, something like caution. "Let us know if you see anything unusual," she said firmly. "Anything at all?" Victoria smiled graciously. "Of course, doctor. We want the best for James. But I saw it." That faint tightening at the corners of her lips. The microsecond of irritation at the hint she might not be trusted. I sat beside my father and held his hand. His skin felt papery thin, like delicate cloth worn from decades of service and sacrifice. I remembered him carrying my backpack on my first day of middle school, brushing dust from my skinned knee when I fell off my bike standing at my high school graduation, chest puffed out with pride. Now his eyelids fluttered like he was fighting to stay tethered to this world. "Dad," I whispered, squeezing. "I am right here." His fingers twitched faintly, answering. Victoria appeared in the doorway, arms crossed elegantly. "Emily, you look exhausted. Why do you not let us take over? You need rest." The words sounded sweet, but beneath them lurked dismissal, a pushing out, a quiet attempt to remove me from his side. "No," I said simply. "I am staying." Her eyes hardened before the smile returned. "Suit yourself. I will be just outside." Blake leaned into her ear and whispered something. She nodded once. He glanced at my father with something dark in his gaze, something not grief, but calculation, as if he were measuring time, opportunity, inevitability. My pulse kicked up. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of machines, hushed voices, and sterile fluorescent nights. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medication, flipping charts. Dr. Morgan visited often, watching everything with careful vigilance. Meanwhile, Victoria hovered like a queen, presiding over territory she believed she already owned. She brought gourmet meals for herself, and Blake spoke in soft tones about adjusting Daddy's legacy one day and asked staff questions about next-of-kin authority with the same tone someone might use when ordering estate jewelry. Blake spent hours scrolling on his phone or pacing restless like a predator caged only temporarily. Every so often he would glance at the heart monitor and smirk like he knew a secret the rest of us did not. I barely slept. I barely moved. I held Dad's hand and whispered memories to him, stories about beaches we visited the time he accidentally dyed my hair blue, trying to help me prepare for a spirit rally the night he told me there was nothing more honorable than protecting your family. I told him I needed him to stay. I told him I could not lose him too. Once, when I returned from the restroom, I found Victoria standing very close to the monitor, studying its buttons with a narrowed gaze. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice sharp from exhaustion and suspicion. She turned gracefully unfazed. "Just trying to understand the machines. It is all fascinating. Technology that decides life and death." Her fingers hovered a little too long over the alarm settings before she let out a soft laugh and walked away. A chill slid down my spine. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I could not name it yet, but it sat in my gut like lead. And when Dr. Morgan later quietly reminded us that any interruption to alarms could cost precious seconds, I felt that same cold dread pulse through me again. I did not know then that my instincts were trying to save us. I only knew this. I was here. I would not leave him. And I would watch everything. If I had ignored the unease growing in my gut, if I had chalked it up to stress or paranoia or the exhaustion of sitting beside a beeping machine for days, I might have missed everything. But that quiet instinct that had protected me since my mother died refused to stay silent. It whispered warnings every time Victoria's heels clicked down the ICU hall. It tightened in my chest each time Blake paced the corner of the waiting room, jaw-clenched eyes flashing with restless calculation. And it roared when I overheard their first slip. It happened on the third evening. I had stepped outside the room briefly to stretch my legs and refill my coffee. My father slept face pale but peaceful beneath warm blankets, machines breathing around him in mechanical rhythm. As I approached the nurse's desk, I saw Victoria leaning over a counter speaking in low tones to a man in a tailored suit. He was holding a folder embossed with gold lettering from an upscale law office. I slowed my steps and listened. "So you are telling me I cannot execute the power of attorney until she signs it," Victoria whispered sharply. And the lawyer replied, "Until Mr. Carter regains capacity or your stepdaughter signs as secondary decision-maker, you cannot override his existing directives. It is the law." Victoria's fingers curled slowly at her side, manicured nails tapping the edge of the counter. "I am his wife. Why is that not enough?" The lawyer lowered his voice further. Because he named his daughter his primary medical and financial decision-maker years ago. He trusted her judgment. Unless she willingly signs over her role, or unless a court rules her unfit, your authority is limited. Victoria gave a tight smile, one that did not reach her eyes. And what are the odds of the court agreeing she is unfit? The lawyer shook his head. None. Every record shows she is responsible. She has clean financial history, steady employment, no mental health issues, no history of violence or instability. She is exactly who a court wants in charge. The muscles in Victoria's jaw flickered. Then he asked quietly, "Do you want to proceed with contesting the power of attorney?" She took a slow breath. Not yet. I stepped away quickly and pretended to be returning from the cafeteria. When she saw me, she smiled with sugary sweetness. "Emily, dear, can you come here? There is something important we need to discuss." My stomach dropped. She gestured to a chair. The lawyer stood beside her, posture stiff and professional. "Emily, your father and I had discussed updating his documents to reflect our marriage," she began smoothly. "Given the current situation, we think it is appropriate to formalize things." She slid a document toward me. It looked crisp and official, filled with clauses and signatures, and a highlighted section where my name sat beneath a line requesting my consent to relinquish authority. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady. "You want me to sign over his medical and financial decisions to you?" She clasped her hands elegantly. "Only temporarily, dear, until he recovers. It will make everything easier for the hospital and legal system, so there is no confusion." I studied the papers. Words about fiduciary control, durable authority, full discretion, no limitation or co-oversight. It was not temporary. It was total. My father had trusted me because we had survived life together, because we were a team. And now the woman who removed my mother's photos from our home wanted me to hand over his life like it was paperwork. I slid the document back. "No." Her eyelids fluttered once a single break in her calm. "Emily, you are overwhelmed. This is simply procedure. Refusing only complicates things." I kept my gaze locked on hers. "I am not signing." She inhaled through her nose, smile still plastered across her face, but her eyes sharpening into ice. Her voice softened into warning wrapped in honey. "You do not want to make emotional decisions when your father's well-being is at stake." My chest hardened. "I am making the right decision." The lawyer shifted awkwardly. His eyes flicked between us. Victoria straightened, pressing her fingertips to the paper as if anchoring her frustration. "Fine, for now." When she walked away, she muttered to Blake audible enough for me to catch. "She will regret that. She forgets her place." Blake huffed a quiet laugh. "Just wait. Time solves everything." A chill shot down my spine. Later that night, my father woke briefly. His eyes opened glassy and weak but aware. He squeezed my hand. I leaned close, my voice barely above breath. "Dad." I heard them. "They are trying to take control." He swallowed hard, throat bobbing. He whispered hoarse and faint. "Do not sign anything. I trust you. Only you." Then his fingers slackened and he drifted under again. The machine at his bedside beeped, steady but fragile. I sat there, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, watching the shadows under the door. At one point, I caught a glimpse of Blake outside in the hallway. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring directly through the glass. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not kind, not reassuring. A smile that carried promise and threat in one breath. The next morning, I forwarded copies of everything to my personal email and printed them from the family resource room. I did not trust hospital Wi-Fi. I kept the papers in my bag and emailed them to my friend Rachel, a paralegal who had seen people stripped of everything when families got desperate. Her reply came quickly. "Do not leave him alone. Something is off. Trust your instincts." I read those words over and over. Do not leave him alone. Every fiber in my body already knew. When I returned to his bedside, I squeezed his hand again. It was time to stand guard. I would sleep in hard plastic chairs. I would survive on vending machine crackers and lukewarm coffee. I would keep my eyes open even when they burned. Because beneath my fear now lived something sharper. Steel. My father had spent his life protecting me. Now it was my turn. And if Victoria and Blake wanted to test how far I would go, they were about to learn. Sleep became a foreign luxury, something I used to know but could no longer touch. I sat vigil every night, legs pulled to my chest or stretched stiff across two chairs, fighting against the heaviness behind my eyelids. I would not give them an opening. Not when the stakes were my father's heartbeat. Not when Victoria's intentions had slipped from subtle to unmistakable. Yet even vigilance could not prevent exhaustion from creeping into every bone. On the fifth morning, a nurse named Sharon approached me quietly, leaning in, as if afraid the walls themselves might repeat her words. She was in her late 50s, silver streaks woven through her dark hair, the kind of nurse who had seen every human triumph and every human cruelty play out under hospital lights. "Emily," she whispered, "I need to tell you something concerning." My pulse kicked up instantly. She continued, "Your stepmother has been asking unusual questions about the cardiac alarm system." I blinked. Questions like what? Sharon's eyes darted toward the room where my father slept. She asked what triggers the alarm, how sensitive the sensors are, and if there is a way to silence it without turning off the machine. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She asked that. Why? Sharon shook her head. People ask innocent things in hospitals, but she asked too specifically. And she asked twice. Most visitors do not even know where the alarms lead to, but she wanted to know exactly how long before nursing staff would respond if it were interrupted. I swallowed a hard lump in my throat. "Did you tell anyone else?" "I documented it," Sharon answered softly, "and I informed the charge nurse." "You should stay alert." My hands curled into fists so tight my nails dug crescents into my skin. I already planned to. But hearing it confirmed by medical staff made the air feel colder, sharper, as if someone cracked open the window to let danger seep in. I thanked her. She squeezed my shoulder gently, motherly concern settling into her features. "You are doing a good thing staying close. Trust your instincts. They usually speak before evidence arrives." I nodded, grateful yet terrified those instincts were right all along. Hours blurred. Machines hummed, nurses moved like clockwork, and my father's breaths rose and fell in fragile rhythm under the ventilator. People talk about hospitals as places of healing, but in those sterile white walls I felt war brewing. And I was not wrong. By the afternoon, my father's cardiologist, Dr. Morgan, appeared again. She moved briskly, purposeful. She carried charts, but her eyes fixed on me instead of the paper. "Emily, could we speak privately?" My heart raced. "Of course." She led me just outside the room, not far, just enough that we could speak without waking him, but still close enough I could see him through the glass. She spoke quietly. "Your father's monitors show intermittent fluctuations, but nothing consistent. The good news is that he is holding steady for now." I nodded, relief mixing with fear, but she did not smile. She went on. "I also had a conversation with hospital administration. Any tampering with monitoring systems is a criminal offense." I felt my mouth go dry. "Are you telling me something happened?" She studied me for a moment, searching my face. "No, not yet. But I have reason to believe someone might attempt to interfere with his care." Cold prickled down my arms. "Why would someone do that?" Her voice softened, but her eyes were sharp steel. "Money. He is a retired Navy chief, military pension, real estate holdings. I have seen families unravel over far less." I whispered shakily, "I am trying to protect him." She nodded once. "I know. And I believe you. But Emily, if anything seems off, anything at all, tell staff immediately. I will personally review every alert and camera record tied to this room." "Understood." I whispered yes, though my voice barely made sound. She returned to her rounds, leaving me with pounding ribs and a resolve carved sharper than before. That evening, Victoria reappeared. She always moved like she belonged anywhere she entered, even now in a place filled with sorrow and suffering. She was dressed impeccably in a cream suit jacket, hair pulled into that signature twist like a weapon disguised as elegance. She approached the foot of my father's bed and offered a smile that made my skin crawl. "How are we doing today, dear?" I stepped slightly in front of my father instinctively. He is stable. She nodded thoughtfully, gaze drifting toward the heart monitor. Fascinating machines, aren't they? So sensitive. One little beep and everyone comes running. She let her fingers trail along the edge of the bedside rail like she was inspecting merchandise. Then she leaned slightly toward the monitor, tilting her head as if studying it. So many buttons, and yet so simple in their purpose. Keep someone alive, or not. My heart slammed against my chest. I moved between her and the equipment, making the space narrow enough she would have to brush past me to reach it. Her eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. Protective, are we? His daughter, I answered calmly, though rage simmered under my skin. Yes, I am protective. She let out a light laugh, smooth as satin over steel. Well, we all want what is best for him, don't we? Except we both knew she did not include me in her version of we. She turned as if to leave, but instead of exiting, she wandered toward the nurse call panel near the hallway wall. She examined the board for a moment, eyes narrowing. Then she ran her fingertips lightly along the corner of the device where the alarm acknowledgement button sat recessed. My breath hitched. You do not need to worry about those, I said evenly. Medical staff handle everything. She turned back with lips curled in a soft, mocking smile. Oh, I am simply curious. You know how I am. I like to understand systems, especially ones that hold power. I stared at her. She stared back. Silence stretched tight and volatile between us like a wire ready to snap. Then Blake strode in. His swaggering confidence filled the room like smoke. He smelled faintly of cologne and sweat, as though he had just finished a workout designed to burn off impatience. He approached our father, but his eyes flicked to her first, seeking silent communication. She gave the smallest nod. I caught it. They forgot I was watching. Blake leaned over my father and murmured too softly for nurses to hear. Come on, old man. Some of us have lives to get back to. I snapped, lower voice, sharp like a blade. Leave. Now. He straightened, slowly predatory grin spreading. Careful, sis. People might think you are unstable. Would not want that. He glanced pointedly at the monitors as if taunting me, pushing my nerves to the edge. After a moment, he walked toward the hallway. Before stepping out, he looked over his shoulder and smirked. Seconds can change everything. Then they were gone. The room felt colder, emptier, but my pulse thundered as if I had run miles. I sat again, gripping my father's hand. Dad. I whispered, they are planning something. I do not know when. I just know I have to be ready. His eyes remained closed, but his fingers twitched faintly in response, as if some part of him could still hear me from the brink. That night, I did not blink. I did not loosen my grip. I watched every doorway, every shadow, every flicker of movement. And sometime past midnight, when fatigue clawed at my spine and tears gathered despite my stubbornness, I made a silent vow. I will not let them touch you. If they try, I will be the one who stands between life and death. I will not lose you, not to illness, and not to greed disguised as family. They thought I would break. They truly believed fear could silence me. But I was my father's daughter, and they were about to learn that even cornered, I would not bow. Not then. Not ever. Time in the ICU is strange. It bends. It pulses. It stretches into hours that feel like days and compresses terror into seconds that decide lives. I sat beside my father with my hand wrapped around his, my spine straight despite the ache running through it. I could feel exhaustion tugging at me like gravity, but the sharper pull was fear. It hummed behind my ribs, constant and electric. Nurses moved through the hall in measured steps. Monitors emitted soft, rhythmic beeps, and fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above us. Everything felt suspended as if the entire hospital was holding its breath. I had drifted into a half-daze when it happened, a faint shift, a subtle wrongness, the kind your body notices before your mind does. My father's breathing, assisted by machines, fell into a slower rhythm. Not a steady, restful calm, but a dragging hesitation, like someone struggling to surface from deep water. I sat up straighter, blinking to clear the fog in my head. "Dad," I whispered. He did not respond. His eyelids fluttered. The heart monitor showed numbers edging downward, not alarmingly fast at first, but enough to make my pulse spike. A single drop, then another, then another. The oxygen line hissed softly, but his chest did not rise as fully. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I looked toward the hallway, expecting the shrill alarm to sound, expecting the nurses to rush in, expecting protocol to kick into action. Nothing happened. The monitor screen flashed a warning symbol, but the room stayed eerily silent. No alarm. The numbers slid again. Heart rate falling. Oxygen level dipping. My stomach turned to ice. Why is there no alarm? I whispered, panic licking up my spine. I stood abruptly, chair scraping back. The numbers dropped sharply, now a cliff instead of a slope. Dad's body jerked faintly, a small seizure-like flutter beneath the blankets. My breath choked in my throat. Dad! Dad! Still no alarm. Still no nurse bursting through the door. Still no life-saving rush of footsteps. Something clicked inside me. An instinct like a lightning strike. They did something. Victoria, Blake, the warnings, the questions about silencing alarms, the lingering touches on the monitor, the lawyer, the power of attorney, the whispered threats. Every red flag converged into a single, horrifying realization. My father was dying and no one knew because someone had turned off the system that would save him. I lunged toward the hallway. Help! My voice cracked. Somebody help him! His heart rate is dropping. He cannot breathe. The corridor outside was momentarily empty. I spun back inside, stared at the machine. The alarm icon blinked flat red. Beneath it, text flashed, alarm inhibited manually. Manual override. My stomach dropped like a stone through dark water. Someone had silenced it. Tears flooded my eyes, but rage and terror blinded me to everything else. I slammed the emergency call button on the wall. Then I shouted at the top of my lungs, raw and desperate. Nurse code. Someone help! A nurse turned the corner eyes widening at the sight of the monitor. She bolted into the room. Oh my God, she gasped. Code blue! Code blue! And then the hallway erupted. Feet pounded, voices barked orders, hands flew. Morgan appeared almost instantly, eyes dark with focus and fury. Someone roll crash! Check override logs, push one of epi now. Nurses surrounded my father, lifting his gown, attaching pads, managing tubes. Compression rhythm started. One nurse glanced at the machine and her face went pale. The alarm was turned off. Who touched this? Who touched this? Dr. Morgan's jaw tightened as if she wanted to scream but forced herself into calm. Eyes on him. Focus. Everyone move. I pressed myself to the wall, trembling violently, watching the body that had carried me on his shoulders as a child now jerking under defibrillator pads. A nurse called out vitals, heart rate critically low, oxygen low. No response. Try again. Stand clear. His chest jumped under electrical current. I could barely breathe. The room vibrated with urgency, yet fear suffocated me. I felt myself sinking as though the floor were falling away. My father had always been a force of nature, unstoppable, solid as steel. And now he hung between worlds, held only by the frantic hands of strangers fighting to keep him here. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I dug my nails into my palms until my skin burned. He needed them focused, not distracted by my breakdown. But then something else pierced through the chaos. A voice behind me. Calm. Cold. A whisper meant only for me. You should have stayed out of this. I spun. Blake stood half inside the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. His expression unreadable, though the faint shadow of a smirk tugged at his lips. I felt every muscle lock in terror and rage. Get away from us. You do not belong here. His eyes flicked toward my father's convulsing body. Belong? Of course I do. This is family. My breath shook. You did this. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly. I do not know what you are talking about. His tone mockingly innocent, but the gleam beneath it was darker. A nurse spotted him blocking the entry. Sir, you need to step out immediately. He lifted his hands lazily, strolling backward. Sure. I am not the one losing it. The emphasis was deliberate. A blade hidden in silk. He disappeared into the hallway. One of the nurses shouted for more medication. Another barked vitals. Dr. Morgan leaned over my father, voice controlled but fierce. Come on, James. Stay with us. Not today. Not like this. You have people waiting. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep from collapsing. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then suddenly a chirp pierced through the noise. The monitor flickered. A beat. Then another. Weak, but there. He is coming back, a nurse shouted, relief flooding her voice. Keep compressions going just until rhythm stabilizes. Tears blurred my sight. My knees nearly buckled. I choked on a sob I had been holding like a dam inside my chest. I moved closer, grabbing the rail of the bed, staring at my father's hand, slack but warm. He was alive. Barely. Because someone tried to kill him. I felt the world sharpen into clarity. A line had been crossed. No more doubt. No more pretending this was just paranoia or stress. Someone attempted to end his life for money. Someone who shared our last name. And they tried to make sure no one knew until it was too late. A nurse turned toward me, her voice firm and grim. We checked logs. Someone manually inhibited the alarm. The words hit like a physical blow. Manual. Not malfunction. Not error. Intent. Dr. Morgan's gaze snapped to mine, eyes blazing. Emily, do not leave this room again. Not even for a second. We are initiating hospital security protocol and contacting administration immediately. My voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. She nodded, jaw tight. We are not losing him. Not to illness, not to interference. She looked like a commander stepping into battle, and I, shaking but resolute, felt the same fire ignite inside me. I returned to my father's side, wrapped my fingers around his, and whispered against his skin. You hold on, Dad. I am here. I will not let them take you. I will burn the world down before I let you go like this. The monitor beeped again, weak but rhythmic. Proof of life. Proof that we were not done. Proof that whoever tried to erase him had failed. And in that moment, a truth crystallized in me like steel forged in flame. They had crossed a line there was no coming back from, and this was no longer just a fight for survival. This was war. A war they started, and a war I intended to finish. I stood up because I could not stand to sit and watch any longer, because the idea that someone had deliberately silenced the alarm so my father could slip away without anyone knowing made my skin crawl, and because I had to confront the people who had been circling us like vultures since the moment they had moved in. I stepped between Victoria and the monitor, my body acting on instinct more than thought, and I said clearly with as much calm as I could force into my voice, You touched the alarm. You turned it off. Explain that. Victoria's smile did not falter, but the eyes behind it were hard as river stones. Emily, she said softly, you are exhausted. You are making accusations without evidence. Sit down, breathe. You are not thinking clearly. Her tone was honeyed, but every syllable felt like a challenge. That was when Blake slipped in from the hall like smoke. He looked at me with the patronizing boredom of a man who expected compliance. You are making people uncomfortable, he said, as if my concern for my father were a social faux pas. My voice rose no longer calm. You wanted control over his life, over his money, but he named me primary. You tried to force me to sign, and I said no. I found those emails, the lawyer, the hint you tried to remove photos of my mother. I will not let you take him. Take. His jaw tightened. Emily, do not push this, he said low, and in that lowness there was a threat like a coiled spring. I do not have to take this from you, I snapped, and I stepped forward, my hand still holding my father's thermal blanket where I had tucked it around my knees earlier. I did not intend to be physical. I intended to speak. But Blake moved like a shadow faster than I expected, and before I could back away, he had grabbed my wrist with a grip that felt like iron. He yanked me toward him so abruptly that the world tilted and I saw white tile and a ceiling light spinning for a second. His other hand came up and struck me across the chest, not hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to knock the breath out of me and send a white-hot flare of pain through my sternum. I staggered back, clutching at air eyes watering from shock more than pain. "Do not," I said, voice small. He smiled a predator's half smile and shoved me again. This time, I hit the edge of the counter near the nurse call panel, and the corner bit into my hip. The humiliation of it burned as much as the sting. Hands grabbed my arms, not gentle, and Blake twisted me toward the hallway as if dragging an animal out of sight. I cried out, and the sound cut through the buzz of machines. Nurses looked over, startled. A nurse called my name. Someone told Blake to let go. For a split second, he hesitated like a man deciding whether to continue an argument or escalate. Then he shoved me harder, and his hand closed around my throat with a roughness that stole my breath and made stars explode behind my vision. I clawed at his fingers because the human reaction to being strangled is to claw, and my nails found skin, but he only tightened eyes locked on mine with a terrifying absence of empathy. "You will shut up," he hissed, voice a rasp through his clenched teeth. "Do not ruin this for us. You will sign, or we will make sure you cannot stand in the way." Panic is a sharp animal that lives behind your ribs when air is cut off. I felt it clawing up my throat like hot hands. My fingers, which had been steady and certain a moment before, now dug into his sleeve, uselessly, grasping for purchase that was not there. The hallway narrowed through the doorway as people began to notice. Security officers moved faster than I could have hoped, but for the seconds that mattered, I was in a small, private hell. Blake's other elbow slammed into my chest as if to mute me. My vision tunneled. The lights stretched into long lines. I could hear a faint drumming in my ears that was not the monitor but my own pulse. A nurse shouted something I could not parse. Someone pulled at my arm. Blake's face was inches from mine now, his breath hot and smelly against my cheek. "You could die, and then no one would stop us," he whispered. He said it as if it were a simple business calculation and not a threat against my life. Something in me broke then, but not in the way he expected. Fear sharpened into something else, a raw, furious survival that cleared my throat and made my lungs burn in defiance. I would not be intimidated into silence. I fought back as best I could, shoving, grabbing, hitting with what little strength I had left, but his hands were bigger, his weight advantage unmistakable. At one point, my head met metal, a hard clang that sent white light exploding behind my eyes and left a ringing in my ears. The world slanted. Nausea rose. The sound of someone shouting my name was distant and muffled as if heard through water. I tasted copper. I could feel the warm press of something damp at my temple where I must have struck the metal, and blood mixed with sweat as my scalp burned. It was not dramatic in the cinematic way movies make it seem. It was close and ugly and intensely private. I remember thinking in a small, cold corner of my mind that I could not die on this floor, like some afterthought that I had failed if my last action here was to let them force our family to bend to their greed. Then everything blurred, and I felt myself sliding like a marionette, with invisible strings cut folding in on myself. I hit the tile and heard the breath rush out of my lungs in a single hollow sound. Hands were everywhere, suddenly lifting me, dragging Blake off as security swore and wrestled and cuffed. I remember a security officer screaming at Blake to stay down to keep his hands where they could be seen. I remember a nurse pressing fingers against my neck, and then my pulse flickered under her touch, a tiny frightened bird trying to flee. Paramedics flooded in from somewhere, and someone shouted for oxygen. Dr. Morgan leaned over my fallen frame and barked orders with the sharp, unyielding authority that had saved my father minutes before. She said, "Emily, can someone get her on a stretcher? Now she needs assessment. We are concerned about a head injury and possible concussion." A medic wheeled me away, sterile light glaring above, and the last thing I saw before the world closed was my father looking toward the doorway, eyes wide and raw, and in that instant I understood his fear had become my fear and my fear his. On the gurney, I tried to hold on to keep my thoughts tethered to something solid. My cheek prickled pain and sensation, then blurred, then steadied into a heavy fog of nothing. They spoke over me, voices urgent but muffled, and I felt hands steadying my head straps, securing my arms. The medic leaned down close enough that his breath brushed my forehead. "Stay with us," he said. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell them I was still fighting, but my mouth would not form words. The lights buzzed and the world tilted, and I thought, I am not ready to die. Not when Dad is still here. Not when there are fights left to be fought. Somehow, they transported me from that floor to a bright room with more machines, with gentle voices, with tests and questions I could not answer coherently. They scanned me, asked me my name, asked where I was, and I told them in fragments Emily Dad, ICU hospital. A nurse wrote notes concerned and steady. "You were assaulted," she said quietly. "We need to keep you for observation." Someone else, a detective who had arrived with hospital security, asked questions about Blake, about threats about prior incidents. I had to swallow hard and tell them about the slammed door and the night he had grabbed my arm and the times Victoria had demeaned me. Each detail felt heavy as a stone, and each time I said it, I felt a ledger being written somewhere that would not be erased by charm or money. My head throbbed and the lights felt too bright. I lay on a narrow hospital bed and tried to breathe through the ache. I watched blurs of faces move around me, faces full of concern, and I realized the assault had not just hurt my body, it had broken something quieter inside, a fragile certainty that the people who loved me would protect what was ours. I had been wrong about some things. My father had believed in second chances, and he had trusted Victoria in a way I could not understand. But as the hours blurred into a long white day, as my bruises swelled and my temple cooled beneath an ice pack, I also felt something else flowering inside me like steel. The anger that had once felt destructive now felt focused, a bright blade sharpened on injustice. If they thought that attacking me would make me retreat, they had badly miscalculated. My hands shook, but my voice was steady when the detective leaned in and asked if I wanted to press charges. "Yes," I said, and though my throat was raw and my lips split from the fall, there was no hesitation. I wanted the law to see what they had done. I wanted the community to see. I wanted them to have to face consequences heavier than the money they craved. As night drew close and the hospital settled into a quieter rhythm, nurses came to check on my father and to check on me. He had stabilized again, but the shadow of what had happened hung in the room like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Blake was in custody for the assault. Victoria was being questioned. My hands still trembled. The pain in my head pulsed like a tide, but beneath it all, a different tide rolled stronger and colder. They had tried to make me a casualty in their plan for inheritance. They had failed. I was bruised and shaken and possibly concussed, but I was awake. I was furious. I would not be erased. I would not be silenced. And as a nurse adjusted my blanket and doctor, Morgan checked the chart, I whispered to myself, though the words were meant for them, for Victoria, for Blake, and for everyone who thought money could buy them immunity. You will pay for this. You will pay for every second of terror. You will not get away with this. The moment the crisis settled into controlled chaos, I knew the room would not be the only place where truth surfaced. While Dr. Morgan and the team worked to stabilize my father's hospital security, moved with a focused efficiency I had not seen before, and I watched them like a hawk. Every movement measured every face, a new potential ally or adversary. They told me they had already pulled the surveillance video and the alarm logs the second they found the manual disable notification. I wanted to be with my father, but I needed to be where evidence gathered, so I followed them down the corridor in a haze of exhaustion and adrenaline. In the security office, monitors glowed in a bank of rectangles showing every camera feed from the unit, and the timestamps marched in neat rows. The lead security officer, a woman named Ortega, pointed out the feed that mattered. There she was, Victoria Hale, moving through the room earlier that evening. The video was plain and ordinary at first, just the normal flow of visitors and nurses, but then it showed Victoria stepping towards the bedside with a measured gait, lingering close to the monitor panel longer than a casual guest would, her hand hovering near the alarm acknowledgement buttons. The footage was time-stamped 3 minutes before my father's alarm was inhibited. It was a small, incriminating gesture, a casual action on camera that in context felt sinister. Ortega stepped the footage forward, and there was Blake Hale later in the hall, passing by the doorway with a particular quickness in his step, glancing inward and then walking away without the concern an actual family member would show when someone is critically ill. Security pulled logs from the monitoring system, and those logs told the story with a cold digital clarity. At 18 to 23:07, The system recorded a manual override and then a user identifier that matched a tablet assigned to visitors in the family waiting room. The IP address logged back to a device that, according to our IT team, had been used on the public hospital Wi-Fi, but subsequently had traces leading to an account name associated with Victoria Hale. It was technical, sterile, and devastating all at once. Someone had physically intervened with the alarm acknowledgement. That was not a random failure. That was an action. Once the hospital legal team and administration were involved, they moved fast to preserve everything. They pulled badge access logs. They pulled visitor sign-in sheets. They archived the camera tape and made copies that were sent via secure transfer to the detective on the case. The detective, a steady man named Morales, arrived, and his calm competence steadied me in a way I did not expect. He sat down with me and asked questions I was not ready for, but answered anyway because these were the words that had to be said for justice to begin its slow turning. He asked about tensions, prior threats the night Blake had slammed my door the way Victoria had tried to remove my mother's photographs. He asked for proof, and I gave him emails, the copy of the power of attorney. Victoria had asked me to sign the forwarded correspondence with the lawyer and the printed screenshots from my friend Rachel. He took notes methodically, eyes never leaving my face, as if to record not just the facts, but the weight behind them. Forensic IT combed through devices and found a string of searches on Victoria's browser history from the days leading up to the incident. They were the sort of searches that were too specific to be curiosity alone. How long does it take for nursing staff to respond to an inhibited cardiac alarm? Read one entry. Another asked how to disable alarm acknowledgement on hospital monitors. Another was a late-night search on code blue response times. The searches were time-stamped in the small hours the same week the lawyer had told Victoria about the limits of her authority. When Detective Morales asked why anyone would look up such things, I said the word greed and felt it cut the silence. Meanwhile, Blake's phone, once turned over, was a trove of messages. There were casual threads with friends that shifted tone when he wrote to one contact saved in his phone as Mom. A message conversation read bluntly, "We need to make sure nothing stops us when the time comes." Another said, "When he is gone, we take the house." The messages were not sophisticated. They were raw and self-revealing. They showed intent in a way charm never could. Hospital administration also found a worrying paper trail in the estate planning emails. Victoria had been quietly contacting financial advisors and asking about expedited changes contingent on incapacitation. She had asked about ways to streamline transfer of title if James could no longer make decisions. In isolation, each piece might have been explained away. Together, they formed a pattern that smelled of premeditation. Adult Protective Services joined because hospitals are required to report suspected elder abuse, and because the combination of physical tampering and financial maneuvering is precisely the sort of exploitation they were designed to investigate. An APS social worker met with my father when he was conscious and gave him the chance to state his wishes in a recorded interview. He was weak, but his voice was steady when he said plainly that he wanted Emily to manage his affairs and that he trusted his daughter. Her statement in record bolstered the case substantially. It turned a legal web of documents into a human testimony that spoke to the heart of who had the right to make decisions. As we compiled evidence, detectives interviewed nurses and technicians who worked the unit. One tech told Morales that Victoria had asked specific questions about the function of the alarm system and that she had been seen near the bedside more than once without proper reason. A nurse admitted that Victoria had seemed unduly curious about how long the staff would take to respond to certain alerts and had pressed staff on their procedures. The witness credibility stacked up like blocks. We also discovered attempts to obfuscate. There were gaps in visitor sign and times that did not match the camera footage and a maintenance log that had an unexplained edit. IT traced the maintenance log alteration to a terminal that had been logged into with credentials tied to the administrative workstation in Victoria's office at home. It looked like someone had tried to make the manual override appear as a standard maintenance action. That discovery made the head of hospital security white with anger. "You do not alter logs," he said. "You never touch those. Whoever tried to cover this up just painted a clearer target on themselves." The detective executed search warrants on Blake and Victoria's phones and on a locked drawer in Victoria's home office. Inside were letters requesting a review of the will, a draft of a document seeking emergency conservatorship, and notes that read like plans rather than ideas. There was also a bank transfer scheduled to move a small property out of James Carter's estate in the event of incapacitation. Morales leaned back in his chair, looking tired but resolute. "This is substantial evidence," he said, "enough to get charges. We will need medical testimony to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt, and we will need forensic confirmation that the manual override was engaged by a human and not a system error." He promised to bring it all to the district attorney. For the first time since the attack, I felt a fissure of hope. News of the investigation leaked in small circles, and a reporter from the local paper asked for comment. I hesitated, not wanting a media circus, but another part of me wanted the truth to be known out loud, so charm and money could not hide it. The reporter asked for copies of the documents we had and promised discretion. When the DA reviewed the file, they agreed there was probable cause to charge both Victoria and Blake with criminal offenses ranging from elder abuse to attempted homicide and conspiracy to defraud. The hospital placed Victoria on administrative leave and revoked her access to the patient wing pending the investigation. Blake was served with an emergency protective order and taken into custody on an assault charge related to my attack. The legal machinery moved slowly from that point. Calls and consultations and cautious strategy talk among the DA office staff and law enforcement. I sat in with Morales as he went over the evidence one more time, the security footage playing on a laptop while he pointed out inconsistencies and timestamp alignments like a teacher pointing out the important lessons. Every new piece of information felt like a hammer blow in a trial of wills. I still had to sit with my father and hold his hand and tell him that the people who claimed to love him had turned on us, and he squeezed my fingers with a stubborn strength that felt like a vow. These are the hours when fear turns into resolve, when anger condenses into purpose, and when truth is not a miracle, but a process of patient accumulation. This is how cases are built. Not on a single scream in the corridor, but on 100 small details joined together until they could no longer be ignored. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, a scent I had come to think of as a mixture of ritual and reckoning. On the morning of the trial, I walked through its heavy glass doors with my shoulders stiff, breath shallow, and an ache still lingering in my ribs from Blake's assault. I wore navy, the color my father used to tell me represented strength and truth, and the ocean that shaped him. My hand trembled slightly on the strap of my bag, but I lifted my chin. I had survived the ICU floor. I had crawled through blood and concrete to get to my father. I could walk through this, too. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras snapping, voices rising like a tide. Questions flung toward me hung in the air. Do you believe your stepmother intended to harm your father? Did your stepbrother assault you to silence you? Do you feel safe? Now I kept walking. Safety was not a feeling I trusted anymore. Determination was the only thing that mattered. Inside the courtroom, light streamed through tall windows that made everything appear sharper. The prosecution table sat to my right, the defense to my left. The judge entered with quiet authority robes flowing, gavel waiting. I sat behind the prosecution, my palms damp, my father's dog tags wrapped around my fingers like a talisman. When Victoria entered the room, changed temperature. She wore a perfectly fitted charcoal suit, pearls at her ears, hair coiled into its usual immaculate twist. To anyone who did not know her, she looked like a pillar of dignity, a grieving wife trapped in an unimaginable ordeal. But her eyes swept the room not with sorrow, but with appraisal. Blake followed behind her, shackled, escorted by deputies. His once confident stride had stiffened into something strained, though the arrogance in his stare had not dimmed. He looked at me as he sat down, and I thought for a moment he might smirk. But something in my gaze must have cut deeper because he looked away. The prosecutor, a composed woman named Valerie Brooks, rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, voice measured and firm. "Today, you will hear evidence about trust violated, a life nearly taken, and power used not to protect family, but to end it." She outlined the case calmly, step by step, the way a surgeon describes an incision. She explained the power of attorney dispute, the financial tensions, the suspicious searches, the security footage, the manual alarm override, and the assault. Then she turned slightly and rested her eyes on me for a moment, as if drawing strength. When she finished, it was the defense's turn. Victoria's attorney rose like a man about to deliver a sermon, voice smooth and polished. "This is a tragic misunderstanding," he said. "My client is a devoted wife. She did not harm her husband. She had no reason to. He spoke of grief, of shock, of a loving stepfamily, mischaracterized by paranoia. He claimed I was unstable from stress, that my injuries came from falling during a panic attack, not from Blake's violence. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. Every lie felt like a cold hand pressing against my throat again. Finally, witnesses began. First was Nurse Sharon. She testified with quiet gravity, describing Victoria's pointed questions about alarms, the unusual curiosity. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She simply stated facts. Next came the hospital IT specialist, who walked through the digital logs, the manual override, the IP address linked to Victoria's device. He explained how the alarm system could not be accidentally disabled the way it had been. The jury took notes, some leaning forward, others furrowing brows. A security officer testified about the confrontation in the hallway. She described seeing me on the ground, struggling to breathe, Blake pressing me into the wall, my head striking metal. She did not flinch when she identified him in court. Dr. Morgan took the stand, composed, authoritative, unshaken. She described the cardiac emergency with a clinical precision that made my stomach twist. She explained that seconds matter, that silencing the alarm nearly cost my father his life, and that the action was deliberate. Her voice only cracked once when she looked toward me and said, "If she had not noticed in time, we would not be sitting here in this courtroom." The judge offered her a moment to breathe, but Dr. Morgan did not take it. She held steady. The courtroom was silent. Then came Adult Protective Services, who spoke about elder abuse red flags, the steps of their investigation, my father's recorded statement. My father could not physically appear due to medical limitations, but they played a segment of his interview. His voice was weaker than I ever remembered, yet iron threaded through every word. "I trust my daughter," he said. "I believe she acted to protect me." Victoria's face remained controlled, jaw stiffening only slightly. Blake shifted restless. When it was my turn to testify, my feet felt heavy, as if every step to the witness stand carried the weight of every night I had sat beside my father, willing him to breathe. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and then sat. The prosecutor approached gently, as if aware I was already standing on emotional edge. "Emily," she said softly, "can you tell the jury what happened the night your father went into cardiac crisis?" I swallowed. My voice scraped raw as I described the oxygen dip, the silent monitor, the manual override message, my screams for help. My hands shook as I spoke, but I did not hide them. I described Victoria's pressure to sign away authority, the document from the lawyer, the overheard conversation. I spoke about Blake's hostility, the bruises, the slammed door from months earlier, his whispered threats. And then I described the assault. The courtroom was silent as I relived it, the hand around my throat, the spinning room, the blow to my head, the sound of my father's monitors fighting for his life in the background. My voice trembled, but when I finished, I looked straight at the jury. I did not cry. I would not cry in front of them. Not today. The prosecutor nodded gently and stepped back. Then came the defense. Their attorney walked forward slowly, hands clasped loosely behind his back, face arranged in sympathetic concern. "Emily," he began, "you have been under immense stress, correct?" I answered evenly. "Yes." He nodded sadly. "Stress can cause confusion, can it not?" I stared at him. "Not that kind." He lifted a paper. "You testified you were attacked. Could you have misinterpreted events? Perhaps you slipped and Blake attempted to help stabilize you." Laughter bubbled from my throat, humorless. "Help. By choking me, hitting my head into metal." He blinked, maintaining calm. "There are no fingerprints, no definitive proof of his hands." I cut him off. "My injuries speak for themselves." He tried a different tactic. "You have a complicated relationship with your stepmother, do you not? You resented her role in the family." I met his gaze. "I resented her trying to kill my father." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge lifted a hand for quiet. The defense attorney pressed one last angle, suggesting I sought control of estate. My voice sharpened like a blade. "I never asked for a penny. I asked for my father to live. When I stepped down, my knees felt weak, but my back was straight. I returned to my seat. The defense called their first witness, Victoria. She walked to the stand with the posture of a queen betrayed. Her voice dripped with gentle sorrow. "I loved my husband," she began. "I never meant any harm." She spoke about sleepless nights, about worry about taking interest in medical equipment to be informed. She denied asking about disabling alarms. She said I misunderstood her intentions. Then she painted herself as a victim of a hostile stepdaughter. "Emily has always been emotional." She sighed, and grief can distort perceptions. She dabbed a perfectly timed tear from the corner of her eye. The jury watched with mixed expressions. Then the prosecutor rose for cross-examination. Her tone was gentle at first, as though giving Victoria rope. "Mrs. Hale," she began, "you asked about alarm systems multiple times, correct?" "I was simply curious," Victoria answered. The prosecutor took a step closer. "You were present when the alarm was manually disabled." "Coincidence." Victoria lifted her chin. "I touched nothing." The prosecutor nodded once as if expecting that answer. Then she clicked the projector remote. The screen lit up with security footage. There was Victoria leaning toward the monitor, fingers hovering, body angled to obscure view. Her expression faltered for half a heartbeat. The prosecutor zoomed in. Then she switched to browser history printouts. Searches appeared. Alarm disable. Cardiac alarm delay. Hospital monitor override. Do these look like casual curiosity? "Mrs. Hale." Victoria's knuckles whitened on the witness rail. The prosecutor's voice stayed calm. "Can you explain why you researched how long a child could survive a cardiac event without treatment?" The courtroom went deathly still. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came. Then the prosecutor pulled up a printed text exchange between Victoria and Blake. "When he is gone, we move forward. No more delays." Victoria flinched. The jurors exchanged looks. The prosecutor leaned in slightly. "Did you want your husband gone?" "Mrs. Hale." Victoria's face tightened, anger breaking through her mask. "I wanted control back." The words burst out before she could reel them in. Gasps spread through the room. The prosecutor's voice softened. "And to get control, your husband had to die, correct?" Victoria froze, realizing the gravity of her slip. "I loved him," she insisted weakly, but the veneer had cracked. The judge struck his gavel lightly for order. When Blake took the stand, arrogance had curdled into agitation. He tried to appear cooperative, but the prosecutor shredded his composure piece by piece. She read his threatening messages. She confronted him with the assault report. She asked why his fingerprints were found on my clothing near the bruising. He stammered. "He said I tripped. He said I overreacted." But then she played the hallway audio, faint but unmistakable, of my choking scream and the crash of my body hitting metal. Jurors' eyes hardened. When asked if he wanted my father gone, he blurted, "Everyone dies eventually." It was not necessary, but the prosecutor let the silence afterward hang like a noose. After closing arguments, the judge delivered instructions and the jury disappeared behind closed doors. Time bled slowly. Hours crawled. I waited. Fingers wound around my father's dog tags so tight they cut into my palm. Finally, the bailiff called order. The jury returned. The foreperson rose. "We, the jury, find the defendant Victoria Hale guilty on all counts." The words echoed. Then, Blake. "Guilty." My lungs filled, then emptied in a trembling release. Victoria closed her eyes, rage flickering beneath lids. Blake stiffened, face draining pale. My father's grip on my hand strengthened. He whispered, "They cannot hurt us now." When we exited the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in months. A crowd waited. Cameras flashed. Someone asked how it felt to win. I did not say victory. Instead, I said truth. Truth feels like oxygen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The sentencing hearing felt different from the trial, not less important, but quieter, like the last deep breath before a storm breaks and the air finally clears. The courtroom was smaller this time, fewer reporters, fewer spectators, only those who had the right or the need to witness final judgment. But somehow the gravity in the room felt heavier than during the verdict. This was where consequences stopped being possibilities and became reality. My father sat in a wheelchair in the front row, his breathing steadier now, a blanket tucked over his knees. I sat beside him, my hand resting lightly on his forearm. His pulse beneath my fingertips was constant grounding. When Victoria and Blake were brought in the quiet hush through the room was not sympathy, it was recognition. Recognition that the story had crossed the point of no return. Victoria still carried herself like she was walking into a charity gala spine. Straight hair, coiled tight pearls, shining like small lies against her throat. But the confidence was thin, now brittle like glass. Blake walked behind her, the arrogance that once pulsed from him like heat now fractured into a jittery tension. His eyes flicked over the seats, over the judge, over me. And then he looked away. The judge reviewed the motions, the pre-sentencing reports, the victim impact statements. He spoke of betrayal, of a breach of ethical and moral duty, of calculated acts committed not in a moment of passion, but through planning and deception. "Victoria Hale Carter, please rise," the judge said. She stood slowly, and I noticed her hands tremble slightly before she pressed them together in front of her like she was still performing. "You were convicted of attempted homicide, elder abuse, tampering with medical equipment, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The judge paused, looking down over the bench at her as if cataloging every detail of her composure. "Your actions were deliberate, cold, and rooted in greed. You attempted to take advantage of a vulnerable man who trusted you. You jeopardized his life for personal gain. You manipulated family medical staff and legal systems." He leaned forward slightly, voice steady but edged with steel. "For these crimes, you are sentenced to 15 years in state prison without possibility of early release for at least 12. In addition, you are permanently barred from serving in any medical or legal decision-making capacity for another person. You forfeit all inheritance associated with Mr. James Carter and are stripped of spousal powers related to his estate." Victoria's jaw clenched so tightly, her cheek twitched, but she did not speak. For the first time since the day she married my father, she looked small. She sat down like the weight of consequence had finally found her spine and cracked it. Then it was Blake's turn. "Blake Hale, please rise." He shot up as though pulled by a wire jaw, tightening fingers, flexing like he thought strength could still be performed into existence. "You were convicted of felony assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, obstruction of medical intervention, witness intimidation, and participation in a conspiracy to inflict harm for financial benefit." The judge's voice sharpened. "You physically attacked a vulnerable family member in a hospital setting while her father fought for his life. You posed a direct threat to her safety and to public trust in medical spaces. You demonstrated not only violence but arrogance and lack of remorse. For these crimes," the judge said slowly, as if making each word carve itself into the air, "you are sentenced to 10 years in state prison. You will serve no less than 8 before consideration of release. You will undergo mandatory rehabilitation programs for anger and family violence. And you are permanently prohibited from contacting Ms. Emily Carter or Mr. James Carter in any capacity." Blake's face crumpled for a split second, not into tears, but into pure, stunned disbelief, like he had always believed rules were for other people. He turned eyes locking onto mine, but instead of hatred, I saw something far simpler and more devastating, the shock of a life where consequences finally arrived. The deputy moved closer to him, and Blake looked forward again, gripping the defense table until his knuckles turned white. The judge had one final order. All assets previously assigned to joint marital accounts or discretionary funds tied to Mr. Carter are to revert to Mr. Carter and his heir. The deputy nodded and began escorting Blake back. Victoria stared straight ahead, frozen in place, her pearl necklace suddenly looking absurd, like a relic from a life she would never touch again. When they were let out, someone in the back row exhaled sharply and whispered, "Thank God." I did not move. My hand still rested on my father's arm. He turned his head slightly toward me and said softly, "Justice was served today." And I believed him. But justice did not taste sweet or triumphant. It tasted steady, clean, subtle, like fresh oxygen after too long underwater. Outside the courthouse steps again, reporters surged toward me. Microphones thrust forward, cameras clicked. "How do you feel?" one called. "Is this closure?" another asked. I thought for a moment, searching myself. Closure is a myth, I answered. Pain does not disappear because someone is punished. But safety matters. Truth matters. My father is alive. I am alive, and they cannot hurt anyone else again. The cameras went quiet for a beat. Then they resumed. My father's wheelchair rolled beside me and sunlight touched his face, soft and warm. We did not need applause or vindication from strangers. We needed air and peace. As we moved toward the car, a woman from the hospital approached quietly. She had been a nurse somewhere on another floor, someone I had never spoken to. She touched my arm gently and said, "You saved him, you know. Not everyone fights like that." Her voice trembled. "You reminded us why alarms matter." She squeezed my hand once, then walked away. Not a grand moment, not a speech, just truth in a hallway offered like a blessing. My father looked at me with eyes full of pride and gratitude, and something deeper resilience mirrored. I did not win today. We survived, and survival for us was victory enough. As the courthouse doors closed behind us, the chapter did not end in fireworks or cheers. It ended in something better. A long, deep breath and the knowledge that sometimes the universe does not ignore the wounded. Sometimes finally the scales balance. In the days after the sentencing hearing, life did not suddenly become soft or simple again. Life rarely hands peace. Like a gift it demands, we learn to build it one quiet piece at a time. The first morning back home, I woke before sunrise, lungs tight, like I had been running in my sleep, heart thudding before my mind could form a thought. Trauma lingers in the body. It does not leave just because truth has been spoken aloud and evil has been named. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, staring at my trembling hands until I breathed them still. Then I rose, padded softly down the hall, and peeked into my father's room. He was sleeping soundly, chest rising in steady rhythm beneath a soft blanket. Sunlight had not yet touched the window, but the stillness inside the room felt sacred, like the world was holding its breath in reverence for the simple miracle of him being here. I whispered a thank you to no one in particular and to everyone who had helped save him, doctors, nurses, strangers who prayed silently, even the exhausted version of myself who refused to give up. Then I began the new rhythm of our life, tea instead of hospital coffee, meals cooked instead of cafeteria trays, real pillows instead of tiles and plastic chairs. But healing was not a postcard of smiles and sunlight. Some mornings I heard phantom alarms that were not ringing. Sometimes a door slamming too hard made me flinch. Sometimes I woke with tears already on my face. In those moments, I reminded myself that scars do not mean weakness, they mean survival. My father's recovery path was slow but steady. He worked with physical therapists, walked short distances at first, gripping parallel bars with trembling hands and determined eyes. I stayed beside him step by careful step, celebrating milestones that would look small to outsiders but felt monumental to us. Standing without dizziness, climbing one stair, laughing for the first time in weeks when he made a joke about the hospital food. I told him gently that he did not owe the world strength, that rest was not surrender. He looked up at me one afternoon, breath shaky but spirit unbroken, and whispered, "I am only still here because of you. Your mother would be so proud." Tears stung my vision, but they were not just grief, they were gratitude, braided with relief. We talked more than we had in years, partially because nearly losing someone makes you cherish every word left to share. He told me stories I had never heard about my mother, about their early mornings by the lake, about how she used to lean on his shoulder during fireworks and whisper that life was loud, but love was steady. I held those memories like treasures, proof that even after pain, love roots itself stubbornly in the soil of a life and grows again. Friends visited in gentle waves. Rachel brought soup and too many blankets. Officer Grant checked in regularly, offering a quiet, reassuring presence. Nurse Sharon stopped by once with flowers and a card that simply read, "We never stop protecting our own." I think I cried harder reading that than I did in the courtroom. Therapy helped too, though I did not go at first out of pride more than fear. But eventually, I learned that healing was not about proving you are strong. It was about allowing yourself to feel safe again. I told my therapist about the sound of silence when an alarm should have been screaming, about the weight of fighting people who smiled while they hunted for advantage, about the anger I still felt and the way forgiveness was not something I intended to offer. She told me healing was not linear, that justice and forgiveness were not twins, that survival can be an act of defiance. In quiet hours, I took walks outside, letting wind brush my face like a reminder that the world kept moving, that seasons turned whether hearts were ready or not. I learned to sleep without listening for machines. I learned that peace was not loud. It was subtle, patient, and sometimes disguised as ordinary life. One evening, months later, after a long day of appointments and a quiet dinner on the porch, my father squeezed my hand and said softly, "You saved my life, but you also saved mine." I asked what he meant, confused, and he smiled that tired, warm smile of his. "You saved the life I get to come back to. Some people survive only to live in shadow. You made sure we still had sunlight." It hit me then that healing was not just recovery. It was reclaiming the right to feel safe, to feel joy without guilt, to build again without fear. I sat there with him as the sun sank golden light washing across the yard, cicadas buzzing gently in the distance. And for the first time since that terrible night in the ICU, my heartbeat felt steady, not because danger was gone forever, but because we had survived it together. Survival was no longer desperation. It was peace earned inch by inch. And as the sky darkened into soft evening, I whispered a promise to myself and to the quiet world around me. We are not broken. We are rebuilding. We are still here. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened, not loud or dramatic like the courtroom battles, but steady like a tide changing the shape of the shore. The hospital implemented what they now call the Carter Protocol. Every alarm disconnection now triggers an automatic alert not only to the nursing station, but also to security and the attending physician. There is an audit log, a timestamp, and a physical confirmation required by staff. No visitor, no matter who they are or how confidently they speak, can ever touch a monitoring panel again without a licensed professional standing beside them. When Nurse Sharon told me the policy had been approved, her voice shook the way mine had on the night everything changed. She hugged me, then whispered, "This will save lives." Your fight did not end at the courtroom door. It rippled. It protected future families who will never know your name, but will owe you the breath they still draw. I did not cry then, but later that night I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and let gratitude fall from my eyes like rain. My father sat beside me, hand resting on my arm, the same man who once steadied my bike seat as I wobbled down the driveway, now leaning gently on me as we faced a calmer horizon together. Recovery continued one day at a time. His steps grew stronger. My sleep deepened. The world around us softened its sharp edges. Sometimes fear still whispered in my ear, but now it did not command me. It retreated under the weight of evidence that I had survived the worst and still stood. Some neighbors and friends still asked the question people always ask in the wake of cruelty: will you ever forgive them? I learned there is a simple answer that holds truth without apology. Some acts do not deserve forgiveness. Some doors stay closed for our safety and our dignity. Justice happened, accountability happened, and that is enough. Forgiveness is not a prize I am required to hand out to people who tried to destroy the life I love. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding, protecting, loving forward. There is grace in that too. One afternoon, months after the sentencing, my father and I walked slowly around the hospital garden, the same place I once paced, while machines breathed for him. He paused to rest, and I sat on the bench beside him. He looked at the sunlight falling through the leaves and said quietly, "We made it, kiddo." I nodded, breathing in the crisp air, feeling every second of that truth. We made it, and we did not just survive, we changed something. That matters. So now, if you are listening to this, whether you are a parent, a daughter, a caregiver, or someone who has been hurt by the people who should have protected you first, let me tell you what I learned. Strength is not loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it is a hand that refuses to let go, a voice that refuses to stay silent, a heart that chooses to keep beating even when fear tries to stop it. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stay. Stay alive, stay standing, stay believing in justice even when the world tests you. As the sun began to set and the sky faded into soft lavender, my father looked over at me and said, "Your mother would be proud." And I finally believed him. I inhaled deeply, letting peace settle into the corners where panic used to live. We cannot control what others do, but we can control how fiercely we protect what matters. There are wounds that heal, and there are boundaries that protect, and knowing the difference is survival. So I leave you with the same question that guided me when darkness tried to win. If someone tried to take the person you love most for greed, would you bow or would you fight? I know my answer. What is yours?